Greetings, Warhammer Universe enthusiast. Before you stands the voice assistant of the podcast. To spread the greater good, I request that you like and subscribe if you find this information useful. Today, you will listen to information about the Age of the Imperium, a time when the Imperium faced constant threats from hostile alien races, heretical cults, and chaos incursions, while also dealing with internal political and social challenges. The Great Scouring was a military campaign that took place in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy. Its main objective was to hunt down and banish any remaining traitors from the Imperium and to eliminate the threat of chaos. The campaign was fought for decades, and it was a critical part of the Imperium's recovery from the damage caused by the Horus Heresy. One of the most significant events during the Great Scouring was the Imperium's effort to drive the followers of Chaos out of the galaxy. These traitors had been corrupted by Chaos and had turned against the Imperium, causing immense damage during the Horus Heresy. The Imperium was determined to rid itself of this threat once and for all. The followers of Chaos had taken refuge in the Eye of Terror, a region of space that was rife with Chaos energy. This made it a difficult place to attack, as any Imperial forces that entered the Eye of Terror would be at risk of corruption by Chaos. However, the Imperium was determined to destroy this threat and launched several campaigns against the Eye of Terror. The first campaign was led by the Ultramarines, who managed to penetrate the Eye of Terror and destroy several key Chaos strongholds. However, the campaign was not a complete success, as the Ultramarines suffered heavy losses and were forced to withdraw from the Eye of Terror. Despite this setback, the Imperium continued to launch campaigns against the Eye of Terror, each time pushing further into the chaotic region. Over time, the Imperium's efforts paid off, and they were able to reduce the strength of the followers of Chaos within the Eye of Terror. While they were not able to completely eradicate the threat, they were able to contain it within the Eye of Terror, preventing it from spreading further into the Imperium. One of the most significant challenges that the Imperium faced during the Great Scouring was the re-emergence of many alien races that had been pushed back during the Great Crusade. These alien races began to attack vulnerable worlds of mankind, threatening the stability of the Imperium. Among these renewed threats was the Orc race, a brutal and warlike species that nearly reunified under the leadership of a war boss known only as the Beast. The war led by the Beast was one of the most significant events to occur during the Age of Rebirth in the Imperium of Man. This massive Orc invasion threatened the very stability of the Imperium and took a great toll on the forces of humanity. The Orcs, a race of brutal and warlike creatures, had been pushed back by the Imperium during the Great Crusade. However, they began to reappear and attack vulnerable worlds of mankind. The Orcs were notoriously difficult to defeat, as they had a natural talent for warfare and were incredibly resilient. The war led by the Beast was particularly significant because it threatened to reunite the entire Orc race under a single leader, something that had not been seen in millennia. The Beast himself was a massive and powerful Orc, standing over 30 feet tall and possessing immense strength and cunning. He was a natural leader, able to inspire loyalty and obedience from his followers. The war began in the Octarius system, a region of space that was home to many Orc tribes. The Beast quickly rose to prominence among the various warlords, using his charisma and tactical genius to unite them under his banner. He began a campaign of conquest, attacking and capturing neighboring systems and growing his army with every victory. The Imperium was initially caught off guard by the war, as they had not expected the Orcs to be able to mount such a large and coordinated attack. The Beast's forces were well organized and well equipped, with massive war machines and hordes of warriors. The Imperium responded with a massive military build-up, sending dozens of Space Marine chapters, Imperial Guard regiments, and naval fleets to confront the Orcs. The war with the Orcs was brutal and costly for both sides. The Orcs were incredibly resilient and able to sustain heavy losses, while the Imperium struggled to keep up with the sheer number of Orc attacks. The Beast himself was a formidable opponent, leading his troops into battle with reckless abandon and shrugging off even the most devastating of blows. One of the most notable battles of the war was the Siege of Terra, where the Orcs launched a massive assault on the Imperial capital planet. The battle lasted for months, with the Orcs relentlessly attacking the city walls and the Imperium struggling to repel them. Ultimately, the Imperium was able to hold out and repel the Orc assault, but at a great cost in lives and resources. The war continued for several years, with the Imperium gradually gaining the upper hand. The turning point of the war came with the creation of the so-called Beast Arises campaign, a coordinated effort to strike at the heart of the Beast's empire and destroy his sources of power. This campaign was led by the newly created Space Marine chapters, which had been formed as part of the reforms enacted after the Horus Heresy. The Space Marines proved to be the decisive factor in the war, as they were able to strike at the Beast's key strongholds and destroy his armies. The defeat of the Beast was a major victory for the Imperium and helped restore stability to the galaxy. However, the cost of the war had been high, and the Imperium suffered greatly during the conflict. The loss of life and resources was immense, and many worlds were left in ruins. In addition, the Imperium's military forces were severely depleted, and it would take years for them to recover. Despite the challenges faced during the war, the Imperium emerged from the conflict stronger and more resilient than ever. The experience gained during the war helped shape the tactics and strategies of the Imperium's military forces, and the lessons learned were incorporated into the training of future generations of soldiers. One of the most important lessons learned was the need for greater cooperation between the different branches of the Imperial military. During the war, the Imperial Guard, the Imperial Navy, and the Space Marines all played critical roles in the conflict. However, there were also moments of tension and conflict between the different branches, and it became clear that greater coordination and communication were needed to ensure victory. To address this issue, a number of reforms were implemented in the wake of the war. One of the most significant was the separation of the Imperial Army and the Imperial Fleet into two distinct branches, the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Navy. This allowed for greater specialization and focus within each branch, and helped to eliminate some of the conflicts that had arisen during the war. Another important reform was the adoption of the Codex Astartes, a set of guidelines for the organization and deployment of Space Marine chapters. The Codex was written by Robout Guilliman himself, in the aftermath of the war, and it helped to standardize the deployment and tactics of Space Marine chapters across the Imperium. Under the Codex, Space Marine chapters were limited in size and scope, with each chapter consisting of roughly 1,000 Marines. This helped to prevent any one chapter from becoming too powerful or influential, and helped to ensure that the Space Marines remained loyal to the Imperium as a whole, rather than any one individual or faction. The war led by the Beast was a turning point in the history of the Imperium. It was a time of great turmoil and conflict, but it also marked a period of growth and learning for the Imperium's military forces. Through their struggles and sacrifices, the people of the Imperium emerged stronger and more united, ready to face the challenges of the future. The Forging, also known as the Golden Age of the Imperium, was a period of relative stability and expansion for the Imperium of Man. This era began shortly after the Horus Heresy, when the Imperium was still reeling from the effects of the Traitors' Rebellion. Despite this, the Adeptus Terra, the administrative arm of the Imperium, worked tirelessly to consolidate its control over the most important systems and expand the borders of the Imperium. During this time, the Imperium made significant strides in the field of communication. Astropathic choirs were established on countless worlds, enabling the Imperium to communicate across vast distances using the power of the warp. This development was crucial in bringing order to the Imperium, as it allowed for rapid transmission of orders and information between worlds. The Imperium also made significant technological advancements during the forging. One of the most important discoveries was that of the Standard Template Construct, STC. Left over from the Dark Age of technology, STCs are a series of blueprints and technical specifications that provide the Imperium with the means to create new weapons, vehicles, and other technologies that are essential in the defense of the Imperium. While working STCs are practically unknown in the current age, the recovery of fragments of an STC, or the templates used in one, is the primary focus of the Adeptus Mechanicus's quest for knowledge. The Adeptus Mechanicus is the primary organization responsible for the development and maintenance of technology within the Imperium. They are a branch of the Imperium's government, dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and the development of new technologies. The Mechanicus has a complex hierarchy, with the highest-ranking members known as tech priests. These tech priests are responsible for the development of new technologies, and are aided in their work by servitors, who are humans that have been modified to become living machines. The recovery of STCs is of paramount importance to the Mechanicus, as they view the STCs as the ultimate source of knowledge. STCs are incredibly rare, and the Mechanicus will go to great lengths to recover even a fragment of one. The recovery of an intact, functional STC is regarded as almost mythical, but even the discovery of a fragment can lead to significant advancements in technology. Major advancement made using the STCs was the creation of new weapons and vehicles. The Imperium was able to develop a wide range of new weapons, including advanced laser weapons, plasma weapons, and bolt weapons, which were essential in the defense of the Imperium. One of the most significant finds of an STC fragment was by Mago's Archan Land. This fragment contained the templates for the construction of the Land Raider main battle tank and the Land Speeder, all named in honor of their discoverer. This discovery had a profound impact on the Imperium, as the Land Raider and Land Speeder became two of the most important vehicles in the Imperium's arsenal. The STCs also had a significant impact on the development of the Imperial Navy, which made the Imperial Navy the most powerful space fleet in the galaxy. The Imperial Navy played a critical role in the defense of the Imperium, and it was instrumental in securing many of the Imperium's victories during the forging. In addition to these military advancements, the STCs also had a significant impact on the development of civilian technologies. The Imperium was able to develop new technologies for agriculture, mining, and manufacturing, which improved the quality of life for the citizens of the Imperium. The STCs also allowed the Imperium to create new medical technologies, which improved the health and well-being of the people of the Imperium. The Mechanicus strives to recover as much information as possible from STC fragments, hoping to find new knowledge, weapons, and technologies. While the most advanced technological information eludes the Adeptus Mechanicus, they have made significant progress through their efforts. Through the comparison of copies and recovered printouts, the Mechanicus has been able to reconstruct many lost technologies. STCs are regarded as sacred texts by the Mechanicus. Ancient recovered printouts from STCs are carefully preserved, and the Mechanicus views the recovery of STC fragments as a religious duty. The pursuit of knowledge is at the center of the Mechanicus's philosophy, and the recovery of SDCs is seen as a way to bring humankind back to its zenith of power. The discovery of a working STC would revolutionize the entire Imperium. The technologies lost during the Age of Strife would bring humankind back to its zenith of power, pushing the boundaries of the Imperium further, and emasculating the aliens threatening mankind. The Imperium would become a technological powerhouse, capable of defending itself against any threat. While the recovery of an intact, functional STC is unlikely, the Mechanicus will continue to search for them. The pursuit of knowledge is central to their beliefs, and the recovery of STCs is seen as a religious duty. Even a rumor that a working STC has been found is enough to prompt a Mechanicus expedition to locate it. The search for STCs will continue, as the Mechanicus strives to bring the Imperium to new heights of technological advancement. One of the most significant accomplishments of the Imperium during the Forging was its ability to expunge the forces of Chaos and Xenos from the galaxy. The Imperium launched a series of campaigns against these foes, reclaiming lost regions of space and purging worlds of their taint. These campaigns were often long and difficult, but the Imperium was ultimately successful in pushing back its enemies. The Forging came to an end with the onset of the Age of Apostasy, a period of turmoil and rebellion that shook the foundations of the Imperium. However, the accomplishments of the Forging laid the groundwork for the Imperium's continued survival and expansion in the millennia to come. The Adeptus Terra's efforts to consolidate control over key systems and expand the borders of the Imperium ensured that the Imperium was better prepared to weather the storms that lay ahead. Additionally, the technological advancements made during the Forging allowed the Imperium to stay ahead of its enemies and maintain its position as the dominant power in the galaxy. The Cataclysm of Souls was an event of significant importance to the history of the Imperium of Man in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The event had its roots in the growing tensions between the Imperium and the Segmentum Pacificus, which was a vast region of space that lay beyond the borders of the Imperium's domain. The High Lords of Terra, who were the governing body of the Imperium, had long maintained a precarious hold on the Segmentum Pacificus. The region was a hotbed of heresy, rebellion, and corruption, and the High Lords struggled to maintain their authority there. This led to a growing sense of resentment among the people of the Segmentum Pacificus, who felt that they were being neglected and oppressed by the Imperium. The Your Council of Nova Terra emerged in this context as a rebellion against the Imperium's authority. The Council was a group of powerful individuals who claimed the right to rule the Segmentum Pacificus independently of the High Lords of Terra. They argued that the Imperium was corrupt, and that it had failed to protect the people of the Segmentum Pacificus from the various threats that faced them. The Your Council was initially dismissed by the High Lords of Terra as a minor annoyance, but it quickly grew in strength and power. The Council had the support of several powerful factions, including elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus, which further destabilized the Imperium's hold on the Segmentum Pacificus. The conflict between the Your Council and the Imperium eventually spread beyond the Segmentum Pacificus and engulfed the wider Imperium. The Ecclesiarchy, which was the religious organization of the Imperium, attempted to use the conflict as an opportunity to unify the Imperium as a religious state. They called for a holy crusade against the Your Council, hoping to use the fervor of the faithful to overcome the rebellion. This effort proved disastrous, however, as the crusade descended into a massive religious war that ravaged the Imperium. The conflict saw some of the worst fighting since the Horus Heresy, which had occurred thousands of years earlier. The Dark Angels, a loyalist Space Marine chapter, made a daring attack upon Nova Terra in an attempt to capture the mysterious Cypher, who was believed to be a member of the Your Council. The Tellarite Rebellion was another significant conflict that occurred during the Civil War. The Tellarites were a race of porcine humanoids who had long been subjugated by the Imperium. They saw the conflict between the Your Council and the Imperium as an opportunity to throw off the yoke of their oppressors, and launched a rebellion against the Imperium. The Civil War raged on for many years, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. However, the Dark Angels ultimately cornered rebel leader Obidya Rakan, a key supporter of Nova Terra, during the Rakan campaign. His capture dealt a significant blow to the Your Council's leadership and helped to turn the tide of the war in the Imperium's favor. The realm of Ultramar, which was ruled by the Ultramarine Space Marine chapter, emerged from the conflict relatively unscathed. The interregnum was a period of relative peace and stability for Ultramar, and the region was able to rebuild and recover more quickly than the rest of the Imperium. The Ultramarines' strong leadership and organizational skills were crucial to the region's recovery, and the chapter's success during this period helped to cement their reputation as one of the Imperium's most capable and efficient military forces. Overall, the Your Council of Nova Terra was a significant event that highlighted the tensions and divisions within the Imperium. The conflict between the Your Council and the Imperium underscored the Imperium's vulnerability and the need for constant vigilance and unity in the face of external and internal threats. The Civil War served as a reminder that the Imperium's power and authority were not absolute, and that even the most powerful organizations and factions could be challenged and undermined. Over time, the High Lords became corrupt and complacent, and the Imperium became increasingly bureaucratic and stagnant. The Ecclesiarchy, the organization responsible for the worship of the Emperor, grew in power and influence, and it was not long before its leaders began to see themselves as the true rulers of the Imperium. The stage was set for the rise of Goj Vandaya. Vandaya's rise to power was fueled by his fierce opposition to the Ecclesiarchy, which he saw as a corrupt and power-hungry institution that had become a threat to the Imperium's stability and security. In the early years of his reign, Vandaya launched a campaign to root out the Ecclesiarchy's influence and replace it with his own vision of a purified and unified Imperium. At first, many welcomed Vandaya's efforts, seeing him as a champion of the Emperor's will and a defender of the faith. However, it soon became clear that Vandaya's noble campaign was merely a facade for his own twisted ambitions. He became increasingly paranoid and delusional, convinced that he was the chosen vessel of the Emperor's will and that all who opposed him were heretics and traitors. His tyranny was felt across the Imperium, as he instituted a reign of terror that was marked by arbitrary arrests, torture, and execution. Vandaya's network of spies was extensive, and he used it to maintain control over the Imperium's vast bureaucracy and military forces. His audience chamber contained a sophisticated map of the galaxy, which he used to order attacks on any planet he felt was not fully under his control. The Imperial military was all too willing to aid him in his attacks, and atrocities were routinely carried out without question. The enslavement of entire populations, virus bombings of innocent worlds, even the use of planetary defense lasers to melt polar ice caps, thereby drowning the world's population, all were done in Vandaya's name without question. Despite the horrors of Vandaya's reign, some portions of the Imperium remained free of his tyranny. The Space Marines and Adeptus Mechanicus maintained their own small, semi-independent states within the Imperium, virtually independent from the central government. Many Marine chapters ruled over their own home planets, free from Vandaya's control. By the same token, these very powerful military forces of the Emperor steered clear of Vandaya, allowing him a free hand everywhere else in the Imperium. Vandaya's first step was to create his own army, one that was loyal only to him. He founded the Brides of the Emperor, an all-female military force made up of women who had taken vows of celibacy and devotion to the Emperor. Vandia convinced the brides that they were the only true defenders of the Emperor's faith, and that they were the only ones who could be trusted to protect the Imperium from its enemies. With the brides at his command, Vandia began to consolidate his power, taking control of the ecclesiarchy and using it as a tool to suppress dissent and silence his critics. He declared himself the High Lord of the Imperium, and he ruled with an iron fist, ordering the execution of anyone who dared to oppose him. The Imperium was plunged into chaos as Vandia's power grew. His armies marched across the galaxy, crushing any who opposed him. Planets were laid waste, populations were enslaved, and the Imperium teetered on the brink of destruction. The Dimamar rebellion was sparked by the planet of Dimamar openly declaring Vandia a traitor and reinstating banned rituals of worship of the Emperor under the banner of the Confederation of Light. The leader of this new resistance movement was a man known as Sebastian Thor, who claimed to be having visions granted by the Emperor himself. The news of the Dimamar rebellion shook the Imperium, and the Council of High Lords of Terror was convened to address the situation. The Council was unable to agree upon a suitable response, with some High Lords fearing that Sebastian Thor may have been a demon seeking the destruction of the High Lords or the Imperium itself. Meanwhile, Vandia himself remained silent on the matter, and would simply stare blankly during meetings, surrounded by his retinue of brides. As the rebellion spread, over 80 systems had joined the movement, and the number would have been higher if not for the military might of the ecclesiarchy itself. Eventually, the ecclesiarchy sent a powerful, hand-picked fleet of forces to devastate Dimamar and destroy all life on the planet. However, the fleet did not make it, as it was destroyed by a sudden, massive warp storm. The region of space where the fleet was lost became known as the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath. Some believed that the warp storm was a sign of the Emperor's disapproval of the ecclesiarchy's heavy-handed tactics, while others saw it as a manifestation of the power of the Emperor himself. The Storm of the Emperor's Wrath became a legendary location, a place where the very fabric of reality was said to be torn apart by the power of the warp. The loss of the fleet was a significant blow to the ecclesiarchy, and it marked a turning point in the Dimamar rebellion. With the fleet destroyed, the rebellion spread throughout the sector, and the Confederation of Light continued to gain followers. Sebastian Thor became a hero to many, a man who claimed to have a direct connection to the Emperor himself. As the rebellion spread, the Imperium was thrown into chaos. Planets that had long been loyal to the ecclesiarchy began to turn against them, and many cardinals found themselves forced to choose between loyalty to Vandia and their own consciences. Some cardinals remained loyal to Vandia, while others joined the Confederation of Light or declared their neutrality. The situation became increasingly violent, with clashes breaking out on planets throughout the sector. The ecclesiarchy struggled to contain the rebellion, and rumors began to circulate that Vandia was losing his grip on power. Meanwhile, the Confederation of Light continued to gain strength. Sebastian Thor's visions and prophecies were widely believed, and his charisma and leadership skills attracted many to his cause. The Confederation of Light began to take on the trappings of a new religion, with its own rituals and symbols. The Adeptus Astartes and the Adeptus Mechanicus, who had previously avoided interfering in the ecclesiarchy's affairs, began to voice their support for Thor's movement and demanded that Vandia be indicted as a traitor. In response, Vandia dissolved the Council of High Lords and ordered his forces to attack the new threats. However, this was a suicidal prospect, as the Space Marines and Adeptus Mechanicus were simply too powerful, and many officers refused to obey, only to be executed by Vandia. The Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus ordered several regiments of Scitarii to attack Vandire's ecclesiarchal palace on Terra, and they were joined by Space Marines from several chapters, including the Imperial Fists, Black Templars, Soul Drinkers, and Fire Hawks. The assault on the palace was difficult due to the fortifications themselves and the presence of the Brides of the Emperor, who had been expanded to a force of over 10,000 elite warriors. The custodians, who guarded the Emperor's body, remained neutral during the conflict. However, a small contingent of custodians, led by a centurion, learned of the assault on the palace and decided to intervene. They were able to convince Alicia Dominica, the leader of the Brides, to follow them through the labyrinth of passages to the presence of the Emperor himself. What transpired between Dominica and the Emperor is unknown, as the Brides have been sworn to utmost secrecy. However, Dominica returned to the Brides and renounced Vandire as a traitor, restoring the order to its former name, Daughters of the Emperor. A ceasefire was reached with the invasion force. Dominica then confronted Vandire in his inner chamber, where he stood alone with his galactic map, feverishly barking out orders to commanders and scribes who had abandoned him. She pronounced him a traitor and executed him on the spot with her own power sword. This was the end of the Reign of Blood and the start of a new era for the Imperium of Man. The aftermath of Vandire's Reign of Blood was a time of great change for the Imperium of Man. While his execution put an end to his tyrannical rule, it was only the beginning of a long process of rebuilding and reforming the Imperium. One of the first steps was to bring to justice those who had conspired with Vandire, either willingly or unknowingly. The Fabricator General who had led the invasion of the ecclesiarchal palace insisted that every co-conspirator be brought up on charges, and many imperial organizations took the initiative, purging their own ranks of those who had profited from Vandire's reign. New High Lords were chosen from among those officials who had joined the opposition against Vandire, ensuring that the Imperium was in the hands of loyal and trustworthy leaders. Sebastian Thor became the new ecclesiarch, and brought about great reforms to the organization that finally put an end to the Age of Apostasy. He moved much of the ecclesiarchy to Ophelia 7, as a sort of dual capital along with Terra, which prevented another incidence of a High Lord taking control of the ecclesiarchy and helped disseminate ecclesiarchal dogma. Dioceses were diminished into smaller areas, so that a single cardinal would not have control over a very large area, and also increasing the overall number of cardinals, which further diluted power. One significant change was the decree passive of the High Lords, which declared that the ecclesiarchy could have no men under arms. Thor complied with this, and all military functions of the ecclesiarchy were disbanded, except for one, the Daughters of the Emperor, who were renamed the Orders Militant of the Adepta Sororitas, aka Sisters of Battle. As women under arms, they did not violate the decree. While the spirit of the decree may not have been followed, Thor believed that the ecclesiarchy should have some military force of their own, so that it would not be completely reliant upon other imperial military forces for its own defense. Another important development was the creation of the Ordo Hereticus within the Inquisition. This order of the secretive Inquisition is tasked with watching over the ecclesiarchy and ensuring that its dogma and decrees conform to accepted imperial standards, as well as preventing cardinals from assuming too much power or otherwise going against imperial policy. This mandate has since expanded significantly to include hunting down other internal threats to the Imperium, notably mutants, rogue psychers, and heretics, anyone deemed to be not in accordance with imperial dogma. The Adepta Sororitas often work alongside the Ordo Hereticus, as they frequently share goals, notably in hunting heretics. However, not all of Vandire's loyal followers were brought to justice or converted to the new order. Many maintained their faith and rituals in secret, keeping the temple of the Savior Emperor alive under the ecclesiarchy's nose. The temple tendency planted roots in the Calixis sector, converting noble families to keep their faith and finance their operation. Their goal is to overthrow the Adeptus Ministorum and restore the secular and military might that their predecessors enjoyed before the reign of Sebastian Thor. The Great Cull was a significant event in the history of the Imperium, marked by a massive purge of heretics and dissenters by the ruling council of the Imperium, the High Lords of Terror. The Great Cull lasted for many years and saw thousands of worlds burn with the pyres of heretics and traitors. The Imperium's enemies were hunted down relentlessly, with the Inquisition and Space Marines playing a crucial role in the purges. The Imperial cult, which had been weakened and divided during the Age of Apostasy, grew in power as never before, as those who defied the ecclesiarchy were purged in blood and tears. The High Lords of Terror were determined to restore order and unity to the Imperium, and they pursued this goal with unyielding zeal. The Inquisition was given sweeping powers to root out heresy and corruption, and its agents were empowered to act with impunity in the name of the Emperor. Those accused of heresy were often subjected to horrific tortures to extract confessions, and many were burned alive in public executions. The Space Marines, the elite soldiers of the Imperium, were also heavily involved in the Great Cull. 30 Space Marine chapters were judged to be wanting by Saint Basilius, a revered figure in the Imperial cult, and they embarked on a crusade into the Eye of Terror, a region of the galaxy that had been corrupted by the birth of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess and pleasure. The Space Marines were intent on purging those worlds stolen by the birth of Slaanesh and destroying any heretics or chaos worshippers they found. These crusades into the Eye of Terror were incredibly dangerous and often had low chances of success. The Eye of Terror was a chaotic and dangerous place, full of horrors that most mortals could not even begin to comprehend. The Crusades were led by some of the most renowned Space Marine chapters, such as the Black Templars, the Ultramarines, and the Space Wolves, among others. These chapters were among the most experienced and well-equipped Space Marines in the Imperium, and were chosen specifically for their abilities and combat prowess. As the Crusades continued, the fervor and zealotry of the Imperium grew even stronger. Thousands of worlds were left inadequately defended as sector fleets, Imperial Guard regiments, and Space Marine chapters were sent on increasingly longer and more terrible crusades. This left many planets vulnerable to attack by various threats, including Xenos invasions, heretical uprisings, and chaos incursions. The Imperial cult, under the guidance of the ecclesiarchy, grew in power and influence during this time. Those who defied the ecclesiarchy were purged in blood and tears, as thousands of heretics were burned at the stake or executed in other gruesome ways. The Imperial Inquisition also played a significant role during this time, rooting out heresy and corruption within the Imperium and ensuring that the ecclesiarchy's dogma was followed without question. Despite the risks and sacrifices involved, the Crusades into the Eye of Terror continued for many years, with some lasting for decades or even centuries. The goal was always the same: to reclaim the lost worlds of the Imperium and to purge the galaxy of the taint of chaos. While many brave Space Marines and Imperial soldiers lost their lives during these Crusades, some were successful, retaking worlds that had been lost for centuries and striking a blow against the forces of chaos. The Waning was a period of decline for the Imperium of Man that occurred following the Age of Redemption. During this time, the Imperium's military resources were exhausted due to the religious crusades that were launched to recapture lost territory and purge heretics and dissenters. The Redemption Crusades were a massive undertaking, involving the deployment of vast military resources across multiple sectors of the galaxy. The Space Marines, Imperial Guard, and various other Imperial factions all played a role in the Crusades. The campaign was directed by the High Lords of Terror, the ruling council of the Imperium, and coordinated by the Departamento Munitorum, the imperial bureaucracy responsible for managing military logistics. The Redemption Crusades were characterized by brutal fighting, with many worlds being reduced to ash and rubble in the process of reclaiming them. The forces of chaos, who had taken advantage of the Imperium's weakness during the Age of Apostasy and the Age of Redemption, fought fiercely to maintain their hold on the conquered worlds. However, despite the ferocity of the resistance, the Imperium was ultimately successful in reclaiming many of the lost worlds and driving out the forces of chaos. One of the most significant battles of the Redemption Crusades was the Siege of Vrax, a brutal conflict that lasted for over 17 years and resulted in the deaths of millions of Imperial soldiers and civilians. Vrax had been taken over by the forces of chaos and was being used as a base for their operations in the surrounding region. The Imperial Guard and Space Marines were sent to reclaim the world, and after years of fighting, they were ultimately successful. The cost of victory, however, was high, with the once thriving world of Vrax reduced to a barren, lifeless wasteland. Despite the cost, the Redemption Crusades were ultimately successful in retaking many lost worlds and re-establishing Imperial control over vast swathes of the galaxy. However, the Crusades also left a lasting legacy of destruction and trauma, with many worlds and populations suffering irreparable damage. The Crusades also reinforced the belief in the Imperium's divine right to rule, and its willingness to use extreme violence to maintain its power. The Macharian Crusade was a massive military campaign launched by Warmaster Solar Macarius. It was aimed at conquering new territories for the Imperium of Man and restoring order to those already under its control. Macarius was a brilliant tactician and commander who quickly gained a reputation as one of the greatest military leaders in Imperial history. The crusade began when Macarius led his forces from the world of Doria, his homeworld, into the unknown regions beyond the galactic east. He quickly conquered dozens of worlds, defeating countless enemies and establishing new imperial territories. His armies were composed of a variety of forces, including Space Marines, Imperial Guard regiments, and even rogue traders who were willing to lend their ships and troops to his cause. As the crusade continued, Macarius grew more and more ambitious. He dreamed of conquering the entire galaxy, and his soldiers believed that he was capable of doing so. However, his campaigns became increasingly brutal and his troops suffered heavy casualties. Many worlds were left in ruins, their populations decimated by the fighting. After the sudden disappearance of Macarius, leaving his armies leaderless and directionless, his generals were forced to make their own decisions, and many chose to abandon the crusade and return home. Others continued the fight, but without Macarius's leadership, they were unable to achieve the same level of success as before. When Macarius finally reappeared, his troops celebrated him as a hero, but it soon became clear that he had been profoundly affected by the violence and destruction of the crusade. He ordered his armies to return to imperial space, and he himself retired to his quarters on his flagship, the Glory of Terror. It was on the return journey that Macarius succumbed to a jungle fever he had contracted on Juchar, according to imperial records. However, it was later revealed that he was killed by an agent of the Officio Assassinorum with cooperation of the Inquisitor Hieronymus Drake for unknown reasons. Despite this, his soldiers deeply mourned his passing and revered him as a god. The aftermath of Macarius's death and the ensuing civil war marked a period of instability and chaos in the territories he had conquered. The 7 army group generals who had served under Macarius and helped him in his conquests became embroiled in a power struggle for control of the newly acquired territories. As the generals abandoned their oaths of loyalty to the Imperium, they also began to oppose each other and the authority of the Adeptus Terra. The once united territories splintered into warring miniature empires, with each general ruling over his own domain. The Imperial Guard regiments that had fought alongside Macarius became divided and fought against each other as well. Even the Space Marine chapters that had taken part in the Crusade were not immune to the unrest. Petty disputes arose between chapters, and some came to blows. For example, the Doom Warriors and Inceptors chapters clashed over resources on the world of Endymion. The Dark Angels also carried out brutal purges on rebel planets, resulting in the deaths of millions. Despite their efforts, the situation remained unstable for many years, and the legacy of Macarius's conquests was tarnished by the bloodshed and strife that followed his death. After the civil war and chaos that followed the death of Macarius, the Imperium needed to take action to restore order to the territories that had been conquered during the Macarian Crusade. This led to the appointment of War Master Solan, who led a 70-year-long crusade to bring an end to the heresy that had taken root in these territories. The crusade consisted of 100 Space Marine chapters, indicating the scale of the conflict that had erupted in the wake of Macarius' death. These forces were used to pacify the worlds that had been ruled by Macarius' old warlords and to bring them back under the rule of the Imperium. Over the course of the Crusade, the Space Marines faced many challenges, including entrenched rebel forces and heretical cults that had emerged during the long period of unrest. However, with their superior training and weaponry, the Space Marines were ultimately successful in restoring order to the conquered territories. At the end of the Crusade, the majority of the worlds that had been under the rule of Macarius' old warlords had been pacified and reincorporated into the Imperium. The success of the Crusade was a testament to the determination and skill of the Imperium's forces in the face of adversity. The 12th Black Crusade was a massive military campaign launched by Abaddon the Despoiler, the leader of the Black Legion and champion of Chaos Undivided, against the Imperium of Man. It was also known as the Gothic War or Gothic Sector War, as it primarily took place in the Gothic Sector, a region of space in the Segmentum Obscurus. The events leading up to the 12th Black Crusade began centuries earlier, with the formation of the Black Legion after the Horus Heresy. Abaddon, who had been a prominent commander in the Horus Heresy, had vowed to avenge Horus and conquer the Imperium. He launched several Black Crusades over the centuries. The 12th Black Crusade began when Abaddon led his massive fleet, the Planet Killer, into the Gothic Sector. The Imperium was caught off guard and was initially unable to mount an effective defense. The Chaos Forces quickly conquered several key worlds, including the Forge world of Mezoa and the Fortress world of Cadia. The Imperium eventually rallied its forces, and a massive naval battle ensued above the planet of Port Moor. The battle was one of the largest in Imperial history, with hundreds of ships on both sides engaged in a brutal struggle for control of the system. The Imperium emerged victorious, destroying much of the Planet Killer and forcing Abaddon to retreat. The 12th Black Crusade continued for several more years, with the Chaos Forces launching hundreds of planetary invasions and naval battles. The Imperium was stretched thin, and many worlds fell to the enemy. The Blackstone fortresses, ancient relics of a bygone age, were particularly vulnerable to the Chaos Forces, and 4 of the 6 were destroyed during the campaign. The Imperium launched a massive counteroffensive, led by Lord Admiral Ravensburg and the Ultramarines. The Imperium was able to retake several key worlds, including Cadia, but suffered massive casualties in the process. The campaign finally ended when Abaddon was forced to retreat to the Warp with the remaining forces of the Black Legion. The 12th Black Crusade was one of the most devastating conflicts in Imperial history, resulting in the deaths of billions of Imperial citizens and the destruction of entire worlds. It also served as a stark reminder of the ever-present threat of chaos and the need for eternal vigilance. The 13th Black Crusade was a massive chaos incursion into the Imperium of Man led by Abaddon the Despoiler, Warmaster of Chaos and leader of the Black Legion. The crusade was intended to achieve what the previous 12 Black Crusades had failed to do: breach the Imperium's defenses and pave the way for the ultimate triumph of chaos. Abaddon the Despoiler launched a massive attack on the Imperial planet of Cadia. The forces defending the planet were led by Lord Castellan Usaka E. Creed, and consisted of the Cadian shock troops, Space Wolves, Dark Angels, Black Templars, Sisters of Battle, House Raven, and other surviving formations. Abaddon's forces included Traitor Guard regiments, Iron Warriors, and a Blackstone fortress known as the Will of Eternity, which had the ability to destroy planets. The Imperial forces were able to hold out against the initial attack thanks to Creed's hidden salvation bases, which mass-produced tanks for reinforcements. In space, the Imperials were beset by a fresh orbital attack from Abaddon's fleet, but the Space Wolves led a delaying operation while Mechanicum forces frantically tried to repair the planetary shields. They were eventually able to prevent the Will of Eternity from destroying the planet. Meanwhile, Trazyn the Infinite was moved to resolve the crisis on Cadia after his collection on Solomase was devastated in upheavals. Using the Celestial Orrery, he traced the disturbances to the Eye of Terror and headed to Cadia. Mechanicum Magos Belisarius Call was also instructed by the Harlequin Shadowseer Salandri Veilwalker to investigate a long-abandoned planet devastated in the Fourth Black Crusade. On the planet, he discovered pylons similar to those on Cadia, and was then instructed by Veilwalker to head to Cadia. Back on Cadia, Abaddon launched another ground assault on the planet's last remaining bastion, Cassacraf. The Imperials were overwhelmed by this massive invasion, thanks in large part to the traitor titans of the Legio Vulcanum, which took heavy losses. The demon prince Acanthos was chosen by Abaddon to lead the invasion, and he attempted to capture the planetary shield generator. After slaying both canonesses Eleanor and Genevieve, Acanthos was able to capture the shield generator complex. However, thanks to the machinations of Trazyn and the sudden appearance of Saint Celestine leading Lost Sisters of Battle reinforcements, Creed was able to lead a successful counterattack. Celestine, summoning Eleanor and Genevieve back from the dead, were able to defeat Acanthos just as the phalanx appeared over Cadia, decimating the Will of Eternity and the Black Legion fleet. The destruction of the Will of Eternity forced the Black Legion fleet to withdraw as Abaddon vowed to lead the next assault himself. With some breathing room, the Imperial forces regrouped and received reinforcements from the Imperial Fists, Legion of the Damned, Crimson Fists, House Tyrannis, and Belisarius Call's fleet of Skitarii. During the War Council, Call informed the Imperial High Command of Abaddon's intentions to destroy the pylons and cause the warp to advance across the Materium. After the meeting, Call accepted the help of Trazyn, who pledged to halt the spread of chaos across the galaxy by maintaining the pylons. Call and Trazyn began to modify pylons in tunnels beneath Cadia as Abaddon began his assault. During the next major chaos assault, the traitor forces experienced heavy resistance in the face of Celestine and her sisters. Abaddon attempted to decapitate the Imperial command by teleporting into Creed's command tower with his Bringers of Despair, But he only found Jaran Kel, who sacrificed his life to delay Abaddon and continue the defense of Cadia. Meanwhile, the Imperial fleet was able to launch a counterattack, and the Eldar entered the battle to support the Imperium as well. At the same time, the pylons that had been modified by Trazyn and Khal activated, causing a massive shift in the tide of the battle. Celestine, the living saint, and her twin guardians engaged Abaddon directly, while the activation of the pylons caused a cascade of effects. The Legion of the Damned and other warp entities were depowered, and those with warp modifications were weakened, leveling the playing field for those without. Despite the odds, the traitorous darts of the Black Legion gained the advantage, and Abaddon was able to gravely wound Celestine. However, just as he was about to deliver the killing blow, Inquisitor Greyfax led a counterattack with Cadian and Vostroyan forces. Creed himself entered the fray, engaging Abaddon in combat and losing an arm in the process. But the final turning point came when Celestine was able to rise again and impale Abaddon with her sword. Abaddon was defeated in the Cadian system and forced to withdraw. In a final act of spite, Abaddon directed the fragments of the Will of Eternity, a space station, into Cadia's surface using attached engines, causing the planet to begin to split apart and the pylons that held back the warp to falter. The Imperium ordered a mass evacuation of Cadia, but the plans were outdated and confusing, causing chaos and difficulty for many Cadian units trying to evacuate. In the orbit, Imperial Navy ships were beset by Chaos vessels and the expanding warp due to the collapsing pylons, as they desperately tried to pick up survivors. Meanwhile, the forces of Chaos abandoned most of their armies on Cadia, leaving millions of traitor guardsmen and cultists to die. The Imperium faces great turmoil as multiple disasters strike. The 13th Black Crusade led by Abaddon the Despoiler results in the destruction of Cadia, a critical world that served as the Imperium's bulwark against chaos. The resulting damage caused the formation of the Great Rift, a tear in reality that split the Imperium in two and allowed chaos to spill into many worlds. The Astronomicon, which is the Imperium's primary means of navigation, is fading, and the Golden Throne, which has sustained the Emperor for 10 millennia, is irreparably damaged. In an event known as the Blackness, countless worlds fall to the ensuing chaos, leading to untold death and destruction. However, in a stroke of good fortune for humanity, the Primarch Robout Guilliman has been resurrected after being missing for thousands of years. Guilliman takes charge of the Imperium and seeks to restore order and reunite the fractured empire. His leadership and military prowess become a beacon of hope for the Imperium and its people, as they struggle to survive in an increasingly hostile universe.